A fully loaded Russian Uragan is the worst thing to catch in the open. 16 tubes, each holding a 220 rocket, enough to bury a Ukrainian position under fire in a single salvo. On the 3rd of August in the Novopavlivka sector, one of them was rolling toward its firing position when a Ukrainian bomber drone found it first. The salvo it was carrying never reached anyone. Instead, its own rockets tore out of the tubes almost sideways, cooking off in the flames. A whole barrage canceled before the launcher ever unfolded to fire a single round. That is the strike we are going to walk through today, not another burning vehicle on a tree line. A heavy multiple-launch rocket system packed with ammunition caught in the narrow window between leaving cover and going loud. And the crew that hit it, the National Guard of Ukraine's Lasar's group, did not stumble onto it by luck. They had already mapped where Russian rocket artillery liked to set up. They knew the ground. They were waiting for exactly this. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what the target was. The BM-27 Uragan is not a tank and not a truck. It is one of the older heavy rocket systems in the Russian inventory, but heavy is the word that counts. 16 tubes in the original layout, firing 220 rockets out to around 35 kilometers. A single vehicle can dump its entire load in about 20 seconds and blanket an area the size of several city blocks. Cluster munitions, high explosive, mines scattered across a road. When an Uragan fires, it does not hit a target. It erases a zone. That is the whole point of a system like this. It exists to saturate. To drop fire on a Ukrainian trench line, a supply route, a command post, an assembly area, and to do it faster than anyone can take cover. One launcher, one salvo, and a stretch of front that was survivable a minute ago becomes something else entirely. Every soldier on the receiving end of a 220 barrage understands this in their spine. The Uragan is a thing you want dead before it stops moving. And on this day, it was moving. That detail is the entire story, so hold on to it. We will come back to why a rolling Uragan is more vulnerable than a firing one, and why the crew's own hurry helped end them. The Novopavlivka sector sits in the borderland where the Dnipropetrovsk region meets Donetsk. It is not a famous name like Bakhmut or Avdiivka. It does not trend. But through the summer of 2026, it became one of the grinding pressure points on the southern shoulder of the Eastern Front, a place where Russian forces kept trying to push the line westward, and Ukrainian units kept making them pay for every field. This is the kind of ground where artillery decides things, where a rocket system in the right position can shift a local fight, and losing one can freeze an attack before it starts. Lasar's group operates here as part of the National Guard's strike drone effort, not the light quadcopters that chase a single infantryman across a field. This crew flies heavy bomber drones, large multi-rotor platforms built to carry real munitions and drop them with precision from above. Think of a big quadcopter but scaled up, hauling a warhead heavy enough to gut an armored vehicle. It does not ram its target the way an FPV kamikaze does. It flies over, lines up, and releases. Slower, more deliberate, and against a stationary or slow-moving heavy vehicle, devastating. That distinction shapes everything about this mission. A bomber drone crew is not hunting speed, they are hunting patience. They loiter, they observe, they wait for the target to be exactly where they can put a munition through the roof. And a heavy rocket launcher, for all its firepower, has a fatal habit. To shoot, it has to stop. And to reload or move, it exposes itself on roads that Ukrainian reconnaissance has already photographed 100 times. So this was not a chance encounter. Weeks of watching went into it. According to open-source accounts of the operation, Ukrainian reconnaissance had already been mapping the firing positions Russian rocket artillery used in this sector, the little clearings behind tree lines and the approach tracks that fed them. When you know where a launcher wants to go, you do not have to find it in the whole landscape. You only have to watch the doorways it walks through. Here is the first open loop to keep in mind. A rocket system this size does not drive to the front and park in the open. It hides. It shoots and scoots, firing from concealment and pulling back before counter-battery fire arrives. So how did a slow bomber drone catch a launcher that has built its entire life around not being caught in the open? The answer is in the timing, and we will get there. Think about the Russian side of this for a moment, because the miscalculation is half the story. The crew of that Uragan was not doing anything reckless by their own standards. They were doing the normal thing. Move up under cover, roll to a prepared firing spot, unfold the system, send a salvo downrange, and get out before the response comes. That cycle has worked for Russian rocket crews thousands of times across this war. The whole doctrine assumes that the dangerous moment is after you fire, when your launch signature has been spotted and the counter-battery clock starts ticking. What that doctrine does not account for is a drone crew that was already watching the road before the launcher ever arrived. In the old model, the launcher is safe until it shoots. In the new model over ground that Ukrainian reconnaissance owns from the air, the launcher is a target the moment it leaves the tree line. The Russian commander was fighting the last war's clock. The Ukrainians were running a different one. These are contracted soldiers, the men in that crew, not conscripts stumbling into a fight they never wanted. The Russian rocket artillery operating in the Novopavlivka sector in 2026 are professionals and post-mobilization contract troops, men who signed for the pay and the bonuses to serve in this theater. They knew what an Uragan does to a Ukrainian position. They had done it before. This time the machine they trusted became the thing that ended them. Let's slow down on the target itself because the value here is not abstract. A working BM-27 Uragan, fully crewed and fully loaded, is a rare and expensive asset. Russia does not have an unlimited supply of heavy multiple-launch rocket systems, and every one of them lost cannot be replaced overnight. The vehicle alone is a multi-million-dollar platform, but the vehicle is the cheap part. The dangerous part is the ammunition it carries and the salvo it represents. One loaded Uragan is a barrage waiting to happen. Destroy it before it fires, and you have not just removed a truck from the map. You have canceled the entire strike it was about to deliver. That is the math that makes this operation worth 20 minutes of your time. Somewhere out ahead of that launcher was a Ukrainian position, a road, a cluster of soldiers, an assembly point that the crew intended to bury under 220 rockets. When the drone reached the Uragan first, all of that simply did not happen. The salvo evaporated. The people it was aimed at never knew how close it came. That is the quiet arithmetic of a good strike. The loudest thing about it is the silence where a barrage should have been. Back to the reconnaissance, because this is where Ukrainian patience turned into a target lock. In a sector like Novopavlivka, the sky above the Russian rear is not empty. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones work it constantly, cataloging tracks, cataloging clearings, watching which fields get churned up by heavy vehicles, and which tree lines have fresh cuts for hiding equipment. Over time, this builds a map that no single photograph contains, a map of habits, where Russian artillery stages, which routes it uses at which hours, where a launcher slows down because the ground gets soft. When you hold that map, the whole problem changes. You are no longer searching 100 square kilometers for one vehicle. You are watching 3 or 4 likely doorways and waiting for someone to use one. On the 3rd of August, someone did. The launcher moved. And the crew above already knew the shape of the ground it was moving across. The bomber drone went up. Now picture the geometry from the operator's seat. The pilot is not in a cockpit. He is at a ground station, maybe several kilometers back, flying by the feed from the drone's camera and reading the drift of the wind and the fuel of his batteries. Below him, the Uragan is doing the most vulnerable thing a rocket launcher can do. It is in transit, not hidden in a tree line, not yet unfolded in a firing position with its crew dispersed to cover. It is out on the approach, exposed on the surface, committed to a route, and moving at the slow, deliberate pace of a heavy vehicle picking its way toward a firing spot. This is the window. Remember the open loop about how a slow drone catches a shoot-and-scoot launcher? Here is the answer. You do not catch it while it fires, and you do not catch it while it hides. You catch it in the seam between the two on the road when it is neither concealed nor ready. Ukrainian reconnaissance had narrowed the search to exactly that seam, and a loaded launcher in transit cannot dodge. It cannot accelerate away like a car. It is a large, heavy, slow object following a track that the people above have already memorized. The first drop came from directly above. A bomber drone does not need to guess at a moving vehicle's future position the way a fast kamikaze quad does. It matches the target's slow pace, holds station over the roof, and releases a munition straight down onto the top armor, which on any vehicle is the thinnest and most vulnerable surface there is. On a rocket launcher packed with propellant and warheads, the top is not just thin metal. It is a lid over a magazine. The munition struck the vehicle and started a fire. That is the crucial word, not a clean, instant explosion, a fire. The first hit did not detonate the whole load at once. It set the Uragan burning, and a fire on a loaded rocket system is a countdown that cannot be stopped. The flames began working across the launcher toward the tubes, toward the propellant in each 220 rocket. And everyone who has ever seen ammunition cook off knows what comes next. The crew's mistake now compounded. They had been caught in transit before reaching the firing position, which means the system was still folded down in its travel configuration. It had never deployed into a firing stance. The launch tubes were not elevated up and back into their firing angle. They were still lowered, pointed low and nearly flat along the vehicle's line of travel. That single detail decided how the destruction would look, and it is why the footage of this strike is so unusual. But the fire on the roof was not the finish. That part came a moment later, and it came out of the tubes. A second drone was already lined up. Lasar's group hit the Uragan twice, 2 separate drops onto the same burning vehicle. The second munition drove the fire deeper into the load, and now the propellant in the rockets began to ignite in earnest. On the footage, the launcher is wrapped in flame and then the rockets start to go. Not upward the way a rocket is supposed to leave a launcher aimed at the sky. Sideways, nearly horizontal. Because the tubes were never elevated, each rocket that cooked off shot straight out along the flat line the tubes were sitting in, skimming out across the ground and the field instead of arcing up toward Ukrainian lines. The system was consuming itself. Every 220 rocket that the crew had loaded to bury a Ukrainian position was now firing itself out sideways into the dirt around the burning vehicle, one after another. Propellant flaring and rockets streaking out almost level with the ground. A salvo built to saturate a Ukrainian trench went off in every direction except the one it was meant for. This is what it means to kill a launcher before it deploys. Had the crew reached the firing position, unfolded the system, and elevated the tubes, those same rockets would have gone downrange onto whatever Ukrainian position was the day's target. Instead, caught folded and burning on the approach road, the Uragan turned its own barrage into a fireworks show pointed at nobody. The crew never got the seconds they needed. None of them got the launcher into a firing stance. The strike closed the window before it opened. Watch the sequence and you can read the whole doctrine in it. The vehicle stops mattering the instant the fire takes hold. The camera holds on it while the tubes empty themselves sideways, and every one of those horizontal streaks is a rocket that will never land on a Ukrainian soldier. In one engagement on one approach road, a full heavy salvo was written off. The men who were supposed to be on the receiving end of it went about their day without ever knowing. Now the accounting, because a strike like this is worth more than the wreck it leaves. Start with the obvious line: one BM-27 Uragan destroyed. Burned out completely, its ammunition detonated, its launcher tubes emptied into the surrounding field. That is one fewer heavy rocket system in the Russian order of battle in this sector, and heavy rocket systems are not the sort of thing Russia can conjure back into existence next week. The pool of working Uragans is finite and aging. Everyone subtracted is subtracted for good. Then the salvo itself. A loaded launcher represents a full barrage of 220 rockets, and every one of those rockets had a job. Perhaps a Ukrainian strongpoint, perhaps a road that Ukrainian logistics needed to keep open, perhaps an assembly area where Ukrainian troops were massing for their own move. We do not know the exact aim point, and it does not matter because the aim point never received a thing. Destroying the launcher before it fired did not just cost Russia a vehicle. It cost Russia the effect of the vehicle, which is the only reason the vehicle exists. Set the price against the tool that did it. A heavy bomber drone and its munitions are cheap next to a multiple launch rocket system, cheap next to the training of the crew, cheap next to the salvo that was cancelled. This is the exchange rate that has been reshaping the war. A modest, reusable strike drone platform, flown by a National Guard crew reading a reconnaissance map, versus a multi-million-dollar launcher and the barrage it was carrying. Trade that all day, and the arithmetic of the front bends in one direction. The crew of the Uragan did not survive their vehicle. Russian losses in personnel here have not been confirmed in any detail, and we are not going to invent a number. But a launcher that burns and cooks off its full load with rockets shooting sideways out of the tubes is not a vehicle anyone walks away from cleanly. Whatever the exact figure, the crew that was trained to run that system is out of the fight, and a trained rocket crew is harder to replace than the truck they rode in on. Think about what happens to the sector for the rest of that day. The barrage that was coming does not come. The Ukrainian position that would have been under 220 mm fire stays intact. The Russian battery that owned this launcher is now short one system, and running the same math every rocket crew in Novopavlivka is now forced to run. The approach roads are watched, the firing positions are mapped, and the slow, exposed minutes between cover and firing are no longer safe. That is a psychological cost as much as a material one. A crew that has to worry about the drive as much as the shot is a crew that fires less, moves more cautiously, and covers less ground. This is the part that outlasts the single strike. Remember at the start we said the Uragan is a thing you want dead before it stops moving. Lasar's group turned that instinct into a method. They did not wait for the launcher to fire and then chase its signature. They pushed the danger earlier in the cycle, into the transit phase, the one moment Russian doctrine treated as safe. Do that often enough across a sector and you do not just destroy launchers. You take away the confidence that lets them operate at all. Zoom out to the shape of the whole front, and you see the same pattern that has defined this war since the drones took over the sky above the rear. The expensive heavy systems that Russia built its firepower around, the rocket launchers, the self-propelled guns, the air defense vehicles, all of them now have to survive a layer of Ukrainian reconnaissance and strike drones that never sleeps and never stops photographing. The launcher used to be the hunter. In the Novopavlivka sector on the 3rd of August, the launcher was the hunted, and it never even knew it had walked into someone else's firing position. That is the refrain worth carrying out of this. A rocket system's whole existence is about controlling a piece of ground from a distance, dropping fire on a target that cannot reach back. This Uragan reached back at nothing. Its rockets went sideways into an empty field while a drone the crew never saw watched from above. The distance that was supposed to protect it protected the Ukrainians instead. Lasar's group released the footage on the 3rd of August, 2026. Not as a trophy reel but as a record. This is what happens now to a heavy launcher that trusts the old rules on ground the drones have already mapped. One loaded Uragan, 2 drops, a fire that could not be stopped, and a full salvo that fired itself out into the dirt instead of onto Ukrainian soldiers. The most important thing that happened that day is the barrage that did not. The launcher came to that field to erase a piece of Ukraine from a safe distance. It left as a burned-out hull with its tubes empty and its crew gone, having harmed nothing but the ground it was standing on. The firing position it was rolling toward was never the launcher's to reach. Ukrainian reconnaissance had already claimed it from the air. The crew that flew the drone claimed the rest.